This is a patient's Bill of Rights on steroids. Starting this year, thousands of uninsured Americans with pre-existing conditions will be able to purchase health insurance, some for the very first time. Starting this year, insurance companies will be banned forever from denying coverage to children with pre-existing conditions.
We believe the law is clear and the regulations will clear up any ambiguity from those experts.
Well, that's one effort. The administration is scrambling to try to make sure that children with pre-existing conditions are in fact covered by health insurance companies, because that is not the way it is read in the law. According to experts who are looking at this, they say that children with pre-existing conditions really wouldn't be covered until 2014. So the Health and Human Services Secretary is working on regulations that would patch that up. In the meantime, the Senate is looking to fix the health care law. As you look live at the Senate floor, the vote-a-rama continues on Republican amendments. So far, the ones that have been voted on have gone down in a party line vote, and doesn't look like they're going to get any wins. The Republicans, that is. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Nina Easton, columnist for Time and Fortune magazines, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, let's start, Steve, with this, well, gap, I guess, in coverage for children that they're scrambling to fix.
Hard to imagine that in a 2,700-page bill there would be gaps, things that people didn't think about. I mean, really, it's shocking in Washington. Look, I mean, this is basic. This is economics 101. This is why Friedrich Hayek wrote The Road to Serfdom. These are the unintended consequences that come following any government intervention. It's natural, and the problem is intervention begets intervention. So you have an intervention like this on a massive scale, talking about 15+% of the U.S. economy, regulating, potentially running 15% of the economy. And of course there are going to be these kind of mistakes. The problem is figuring out where the unintended consequences are and how you're going to fix them. The problem, on top of the problem, is that you fix them with additional intervention. So I think this is exactly why conservatives were warning about the scope and the magnitude of this legislation from the outset. It's a vindication one day later.
Nina, there are other things that are coming to light here. Senator Max Baucus, Democrat, went to the floor of the Senate and said one other point I think is very important to make is that it's true in certain cases taxes will go up for some Americans who may be making less than $200,000. So there are other things that are being talked about now about this law.
They're being talked about on the floor of the Senate as we speak. This exercise that's going on right now, it's somewhat, I think it's playing overtime in a football game that's over. They're playing overtime solo. So, none of this stuff's going to pass. But they're able to frame the issue with these amendments that are being offered, that are going to be voted down, but you can bring them up again in November. That's the point that you're talking about is exactly right. There's going to be an amendment offered.
This is a Democrat. This is Max Baucus saying.
Oh, Democrat, right.
Yeah.
But this in
the Republican amendments, obviously.
In the Republican amendments, one of the Republican amendments is to report back to Congress with a commitment that people who make less than $250,000 a year won't be taxed. There's another amendment by Judd Gregg that says you're not allowed to raid Medicare to pay for this entitlement, which of course the bill does. So you can one by one get Democrats on the record voting against these amendments and use it in November.
Charles?
Well, I think one of the problems in the bill is not just the drafting errors, as we saw in this particular case with the children's pre-existing condition, or even the unintended consequences. I think the real problem is there's so much in the bill that is delegated to the bureaucrats, to the Department of Health and Human Services, for example. For example, we don't know what will be the required basket of coverage that any plan is going to have in order to be, quote, acceptable to the federal government and thus to people who receive a subsidy if you buy it. That's going to be determined in the future by the Secretary of HHS, and that could be arbitrary. I mean, if you're a 70-year-old a widow, are you going to need drug abuse rehab coverage? If you're a single male, are you going to need obstetrics? Of course not. But all of this will be decreed by a bureaucrat, unelected. It's not in the law now. It's just it'll be decided. And there's a lot of this which is going to be decided. And the other example of this, and the one that people are really worried about, is these committees that will decide which is acceptable or the best treatment. Once you have a committee like that, as of now it's advisory, but in the future it could easily become compulsory as costs rise, as happened in Britain, which has the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, the NICE committee it's called, which decides who gets drugs in cancer. If it's expensive, you don't get it. And that is what is in the bill, but not written in detail today. It'll all be decided in the future by unelected committees and bureaucrats.
Quickly down the line, there have been charges by Democratic lawmakers and specific incidents that are being investigated about threats. Congressman Bart Stupak from Michigan released some specific phone calls and faxes. There have been a couple of other incidents from other lawmakers who have reported this, and officials are investigating all of these. What about this issue down the line and how it plays out, and what about it?
I'm sure a lot of this is trumped up the way of the unruliness of some of the crowd on the day of the voting in the House was trumped up. You're always going to have a kook and a nut here and there. It's being used by supporters of Obamacare to tar opponents with, threats, violence, being un-American in general. I think it ought to be denounced, as the Republicans have. It should be, but it's not reflective of those who oppose the bill.
Nina.
Yeah, but I disagree, Charles. I mean, these sound like real threats. People, and it risks the credibility of the opposition to let these threats go without answering them. I was pleased to see that Boehner and others answered them today, and I think they're going to need to continue to answer them because the passions do run high, and there is a sense among some people that that they want to go after. They want retribution on some level. You hear that on the airwaves at times, and I think it behooves everybody to calm things down and say, go vote in November.
Is this different? Is this different than other big issues that on both sides where people, extremes, issued threats?
That's fine. Then you should be doing it on the other side when it happens on the other side. But it's really important for leaders of the opposition of the bill to come out very clearly and separate themselves and state clearly that we don't. And they did, and they need to continue doing so.
They shouldn't continue to do it. They did it. They did it once, and they should never do it again. That's the end. He said, we don't approve of this. That's it. If you continue to beat him up, it continues to be a story, and it's counterproductive. The people who are making threats shouldn't make threats. The leaders of the party, the Republican Party, should do exactly what they did. But this happens all the time, and I could refer you to my own voicemail sometimes after appearances on other programs and other networks where the vitriol level was every bit as harsh as what I heard in Bart Stupak's voicemail.
Okay, we probably won't have the end of this one, and we'll be back with this, but log on to our homepage, foxnews.com/special report, for an exclusive report by correspondent Claudia Cowan about how the issue of health care is affecting the restaurant business.